Hi there, I'm Matt Gemmell and I'm here once again to talk about my KESTREL techno-thrillers series. It's another lovely day here in Edinburgh, very warm indeed. I will probably have to occasionally take sips of water whilst I'm doing this video, apologies for that. Yesterday we talked about the series as a whole and the first book, Changer, which brings us today to book 2, Toll. Really like this one. Before we get into Toll itself, I've had a bunch of questions which more pertain to the series in general, so let me talk about some of those first. Main one being about the characters. How did I come by the characters? Why those characters? Why they have the personalities that they do? And this is about, of course, the 5 main characters. So you've got Aldridge, Dr. Neil Aldridge, we talked about quite a bit in the previous video. There's Captain Greenwood, there's Alicia Ramos, there's Larry Dowling, and of course there's Goose, Garrett Goosens. And they all have different roles in the team and in the stories, but they came about for more for narrative functions and sort of aesthetic or artistic functions rather than because of the particular abilities and skills of the characters themselves. As I touched upon previously, Aldridge is of course a huge projection of myself. He's my avatar in the world of Kestrel and my way to let myself play in that world, sort of make some of my wee in jokes and that kind of thing, and this is important, as an outlet for the inevitable tendency of an author to project themselves into at least one character. If you can sort of pick that character ahead of time, not only is it frankly more fun, but it sort of limits the splash radius of your self-projection, which can be very useful. In terms of the narrative function, I was very conscious that Aldridge was the outsider, which is a key role because an outsider allows the reader to make observations and judgments in story. So you've got, I mean, in sci-fi, you've got like the Spock character or the Data, the android character in Star Trek, and you always find one of these observer type characters, and Aldridge is that in the world of Kestrel. He also serves a very important function of being a tension breaker. He makes a lot of quips. He's not the comic relief in an incapable or slapstick way, but he's a tension breaker. And very closely related to that, he has the narrative function of being the chaotic force. Because Kestrel is, of course, a military team, and there's a certain structure. There's rank and the chain of command, and there's obedience and orders, and it's very structured and controlled. And I think to humanize that, one of the primary ways of humanizing that is to have a chaotic force. And Aldridge is that, straining against the rules, pushing against the boundaries. So that's why we have him. In terms of why he's a particle physicist, it's because of the events of Changer. It was the right background and skill set for him to have, and his general scientific knowledge gives him a natural role in the team. So it was a balance of his function in the narrative of Changer and his usefulness going forward. It was a very designed sort of decision. The leader is Captain Greenwood, Jessica Greenwood. Aldridge is Scottish, Greenwood is English, which is of course a different thing. And she she is the voice of authority and of capability under stress and under fire. She's her larger function, really her primary function, is that she's a vessel for the concepts of duty and responsibility, because responsibility is a key theme throughout the Kestrel stories, because there's, as I mentioned in the previous video, there's always an ethical dilemma, and that requires a sense of responsibility, a sense of the right thing, or at least struggling to find the right thing. The two go hand in hand. They're like bookends to an ethical dilemma, and Greenwood is the self-questioning, not self-doubting, because she's still effective and an action taker, but she's the vessel for questions of responsibility, and she's also the primary character within which these dilemmas play out, because the buck stops with her, and she is very often in the stories, she's the actual voice in terms of her words and her thoughts, which allows the reader to grapple with these ethical dilemmas. So that's Greenwood. She also, of course, has a growing, as the books go forward, role in a romantic capacity, and that's something I hugely enjoy, because I love romance, and I love those aspects of books. I don't read the genre romance because it's quite a different thing, but I love the romantic elements and subplots to stories, and human touch and relationship building and notes of affection, particularly the frustration of affection that comes about because of course, Aldridge is the other party here, his chaoticness. Greenwood can be extremely straight-laced to the point of being repressed. Aldridge is on the surface the opposite of that, but actually he deals with quite a lot of self-repression as well. So it makes for an interesting will they, won't they dynamic. I mean, of course they will, but it's the journey that's the interesting thing. So there's a lot to Greenwood. Larry Dowling, he's he's Welsh, from the fabulous country of Wales. Glorious people, magnificent accents, fascinating language. He's a big guy, massive, powerful, and he is. That's one of his dynamics. He's a physical manifestation, a personification of physical power. And you can't avoid the issue of physical power and the coercions and controls that it makes possible, when you are dealing with a sort of military context. So Dowling is right there as a constant reminder of, and an emblem of, the assertion of physical authority. But personality-wise, he's also the character who embodies, I think the two main traits I would say are loyalty and dependability. Two things which I'm sure almost anyone would associate strongly with military personnel. Dowling has a fierce loyalty to Greenwood. He's like a big brother, really. I think there is very much a sort of brother to sister love there. They're not related as characters, but they have a unshakable you know, second in command and commanding officer relationship, and an absolute mutual respect. And Greenwood knows that if something needs done, Dowling will do it. He will find a way to do it. He'll make sure it's done. There won't be a moment's hesitation. But she also knows that if she's having doubts, that he will offer words of guidance. Not that he's a man of many words. A charming aspect of him is that for all of his extreme power, he is remarkably good-natured and gentle. And I think he just wants the best for everyone. He'll follow his orders and do absolutely what needs to be done. But when something good happens, I think he's one of the people that quietly and privately is most happy about it. So I've got a lot of affection for Dowling. Who's next? Goose. Gerrit Goosen's Dutch, of course. He fulfills an interesting role. He is the personification of ingenuity and the sort of acknowledgement of and connection with the techno part of techno-thriller genre. Goose is about the power of information, and certain stories, particularly the third book, that sort of comes to the fore. It's an acknowledgement of the interconnected and technological world that we live in, and the necessity of interfacing with that world in every respect, that gives us Goose's character. On a personal level, he's a bit more detached from the rest of the group, and he has been in the military side of things for the least amount of time, with the exception of Aldridge, of course. So he's got interesting other sides to his personality, but he is our human interface, I have to say again, with the technologies and the flows of information that are necessary to write stories in this genre. He also seems to get injured a fair bit. And last, of course, and certainly not least, we have Ramos, Alicia Ramos. She is she's Spanish. Well, she's Catalan, in fact. I need to be careful to make that distinction. She's quite taciturn as well, and she's very private in terms of how the character presents herself. Although she's got a home life, you know, she's married, and we do learn more about her wife as we go through. But the narrative function of Ramos is that she is about another dynamic of a very important dynamic of the whole military thriller thing, which is the role of tactics and skill. She's a sniper, and she's a driver, and she's a pilot, and she really brings to the fore the idea, the reality that whilst many parts of our story might deal with the ways in which these people are similar to us, the civilians, the readers, there are a number of ways in which military people, highly trained people, are not like us. And Ramos really embodies quite a lot of that. But the even more important thing, I would say, and the thing for me that's a primary dynamic of Ramos, is that she is the reader's vehicle for the kind of dark pragmatism that soldiers often must employ. The need to kill, if there can be a need to kill, you know, the difficult decisions, the looking at things with a self-enforced dispassion, and this idea of constant restrained lethality. And that is Ramos, and she's I guess if someone sort of saw her straight away, she's slim and she's, you know, small and she's got cropped dark hair and these big eyes. You wouldn't maybe immediately come to the conclusion that she is probably the most deadly member of the team, and yet that is the case. And I find it interesting that there's that duality about her, because when you do get scenes of her not in an operational capacity, she's an avid reader, she's always reading away, and she loves her wife and so on. And she's clearly a strong and reliable, if often silent, presence at the shoulder of, you know, whoever requires that support. So she's a very interesting character, and I'm looking forward to future stories where she can take the spotlight even more often, and there's some interesting times where she does so in the books so far. So yeah, the characters, they came about because of the need to acknowledge and have vessels for these narrative functions and these questions, where you're constantly treading this line of the exotic, I suppose, world of elite military operatives and facing strange events beyond our everyday world, but also seeing them as human beings. And they all have these important functions. And I think that it makes them better characters. A bit larger than life, of course, because they have to, you know, have that kind of Greek theatre sort of function where they embody things and they have to sort of be the representatives of those concepts, as well as, of course, being characters and human beings and doing things in the story. So yeah, there's actually quite a lot to the characters and why they are the way they are, which is interesting, I suppose. And I always, when I'm sitting down to plan a new one, I always remind myself of those things, because I've got character sheets for each one of the characters, which I keep up to date with biographical information and when they've been injured and stuff we found out about their background and so forth. And I re-ground myself in all of that before sitting down to work out what these characters do in a new plot. Which brings us on to another question I've had about settings and how scenes take place in settings. Techno-thrillers, of course, have, amongst other things, they tend to have these choreographically complex scenes, invariably action scenes or chase scenes, where you've got a whole bunch of pieces on the board and certain things need to happen and there are certain constraints. The constraints are often of time. The most common constraint is probably gunfire or vulnerability to gunfire as a limitation to movement. And you've got the location and its structure. And what you'll find, what I certainly find, is that if the writer doesn't have a clear picture of that in their head, then that fuzziness comes through in the prose, and the reader won't have a clear picture either. And that's the last thing I want. I'm not a fan, whilst it's exciting, I'm not really a fan of that style of, you know, the style of action cinema whereby it's constant like smash cuts and 2-second scenes and everything's so fast it's bloody, and you never really, you certainly get a sense exciting stuff is happening and hugely skilled people are fighting for their lives, and that's great, but what you don't get is a particular sense of place and of the dynamics of movement. And I prefer to express capability and tension in that manner. So I do have to plan out those scenes, and my way for doing that has evolved over time. In Changer, there's a particular, I guess the particular scene for that happens not too far into the book, and it's actually here in Edinburgh, and it's in a multi-story parking facility, garage, whatever you call it. And to plan it out, when I became aware of the complexity of it, I used Lego, believe it or not. I had like the odd wee bits of Lego lying about. This is before my son was born, by the way, so it was just my Lego. And I sort of started planning out, and my wife saw I was doing that, and then a parcel arrived. You know, she bought some, like a Lego set that seemed to have useful like wee people and pieces that I could build into some facsimile of the scene to literally plan out where people would go and check the sight lines and figure out movement and cover and the ballet of it, really. And it was so incredibly helpful because you can have that thing sitting there and you can immediately see where people are clustered and where people would need to move or couldn't move, and the density and the flow and so on. And it really is like choreography, or like a stage direction, I suppose. And if you can do that, get a really clear picture of it, then you're able, when you're writing the scene, to incorporate a sense of directionality and of mass and of place and all this stuff, which clarifies the scene in the reader's mind and turns it into a picture rather than words or disconnected moments. And I think that's it's very powerful, and it's part of my job. So yeah, I used Lego. When it came to Toll, the book that I'll be talking about in a minute, the second one, there is also such a scene. Takes place later. The one in Changer, I think, is towards the end of the first act. It's towards the end of the second, I think, for Toll. And the way I did that was I drew it out. Used the iPad and the Apple Pencil, you know, so I could quickly erase and use different colours just more easily. But yeah, I sketched it all out, and arrows for movement and so on. From a top-down perspective, it is beyond my capabilities to draw it isometrically or whatever. I think I did consider modelling it in the 3D animation-y sense, but not skill set, and it was, I guess it was beyond my needs. But I did draw out this particular scene and figure out how it would all work, and it is incredibly helpful. It just you find that by making that design, it retrospectively makes changes to you know, some of the setup stuff you've written before, and it's always for the better. You know, clarity is the thing. So yes, I do absolutely plan out in a visual way some of the more complicated scenes. And I think whilst I was working on Jinx, the third one, I used that sketching out on the iPad technique for you know, figuring out the scene choreography. So there you go. Right, it is time for Toll. Love this cover. It's gorgeous. Beautiful, vivid, you know, yellowy orange colour, and that sort of two-element combination. Let us read the blurb once more. Here we go. The perfect weapon lay buried for 70 years. Now its deadly power has been unleashed. The Norwegian Sea. A group of eco-activists disappear from their vessel. Only their dental fillings remain. Owl Mountains, Poland. A wealthy environmentalist resurrects a secret experiment forgotten since the close of the Second World War, determined to heal our ravaged planet. When a dossier finds its way to the desk of Dr. Neil Aldridge, the elite EU Special Forces team codenamed KESTREL is drawn into a dangerous pursuit across Europe and beyond to prevent a cull of Earth's greatest threat, humanity. As the final countdown begins, Captain Jessica Greenwood faces the ultimate choice: fight to prevent the dark future ahead, or help make it happen. Bom, bom, bom. I hear those dramatic note tones as I read the final ellipsis of these things. I hear it in my head. So, it's a pretty cool blurb. If that doesn't sound too arrogant to say so, my apologies. That blurb came a lot easier than the one for Changer. I literally copied and pasted the one from Changer just to keep the flavor firm in my head, and you can see that there are sort of echoes in that it's location blah blah blah, location blah blah blah, and then sort of a para of tension building and sort of sexing up, and then the cliffhangery consequency one. You know, it's a formula and it works really well. If you are writing blurbs yourself or trying to, the best thing to do, honestly, is jump on, you know, online bookstore of your choice, or grab books from your bookshelf that are a similar genre and just read the blurbs. Even copy bits of them down and figure out how to make it fit your stuff. It's a particular voice. I suppose these days you might use a piece of technology to do it for you, but it's good practice, and you should be able to do these things yourself. So Toll. How did it come about? This was inspired by a non-fiction book called The Hunt for 0 Point by Nick Cook. Nick Cook was, maybe is, it certainly was, the aviation editor at Jane's Defence Weekly for more than a decade. Now, Jane's Defence Weekly, if you don't know, is unsurprisingly a weekly publication dealing with aerospace and military vehicles and technologies, and it is extremely well thought of, extremely technical, and respected and well informed and all that sort of thing. It's Jane's, just like the name, Jene apostrophe S, Defence Weekly. It's a US publication, and he was the aviation editor, and you should read it, honestly. It's a work of investigation and speculation regarding possible existence or striving for this so-called 0 point energy, you know, free energy. And it's intertwined with the Second World War and conspiracy theory and all this stuff. But it's a pretty scholarly and skeptical approach. And it's fascinating. And one of the things it touches up against is, maybe you've even heard of it, this this supposed machine called Die Glocke, or the bell. The bell, so called because roughly the outline of a big bell, like you would find in a church steeple. A machine of mysterious purpose, possibly, you know, created and worked on by this missing to this day Nazi, I think he was an Obergruppenführer, Hans Kammler. And there's been all this speculation, as there is with conspiracy theories, about what the machine might have done if it existed, whether it was a 0 point energy generator, whether it was a radiation weapon, whether it was a cloaking device and a time travel device and all this stuff, you know. All delicious silliness. But I read this Hunt for 0 Point a number of years ago, and I was just absolutely fascinated by the idea of the bell. Not at all in relation to time travel or 0-point energy or any of that. When you're a writer, it's the flavour of things that strike you, usually much more than the detail. And you find that the image hits you and you strip out all the informational content and start filling it with your own stuff. And that's exactly what sort of happened. So I knew I would write, as soon as I'd read The Hunt for 0-point, I knew I would write a book about the bell at some stage. This was before Kestrel existed, before Changer and all that. I just knew I would write something about the bell. And I mean, I guess I should say, spoilers, Toll is that book. It's also the only one of the Kestrel books so far to explicitly have an epigraph. An epigraph, if you don't know, is that thing in novels where the author puts in usually a wee quote, maybe from a song lyric or a piece of poetry or something. It can be anything, and it's usually just before the actual book itself starts. In my case, it's a dictionary definition of toll, of course. You know, it says toll, noun, and there's the three meanings: a price paid for a privilege or service, an amount or extent of loss or destruction, you know, the toll taken, the death toll, and so on, and of course the sound of a bell being struck. And you read that right before you start reading the book itself. It's right before the prologue, and it will not surprise you to learn that that definition applies in all three senses to the story. So that's quite cool. That is another hallmark of the Kestrel series. The titles are one word and they apply in more than one way. Like Aldridge obviously has an enormous change in his circumstances, as well as having this ability to make alteration to very recent events under certain certain circumstances of stress, etc. And Toll similarly has got that multivalent meaning. So yes, The Hunt for 0-point. When I was trying to put together the second Kestrel book, that's a daunting thing. Second book is terrifying because you think you can't catch lightning in a bottle again. That was the one book you had in you. There's a lot of doubt. It took me a long time to understand the antagonist's motivation and thus what the plot would be. And you may be wondering if I've sort of jumped the gun a bit there, but I did start with the antagonist, because if you watched the previous video that I did on Changer, you'll know that originally Kestrel had 6 team members before Aldridge came on board, rather than the 4, Greenwood, Dowling, Goose and Ramos, before Aldridge. And the antagonist of Toll is a Japanese national called Tsutomu Miwa. And Miwa was originally a member of Kestrel in the original timeline, believe it or not, before Changer was radically changed itself. Very different sort of background, but the name and the physicality of the character, unbelievably, if you've read Toll, there are actually a whole bunch of scenes, I was going to say lost to history, they're not, I've got them archived, where Miwa, as a very different person, but the same name and stature and appearance and so on, was fighting alongside Kestrel and Aldridge against Merrick and Michelanthropes in the events of Changer. Mind-blowingly weird, especially for me. It seems a million years ago and in a different life, but there you go. But Miwa in Toll is most definitely not a member of Kestrel. He's the antagonist. I had 2 sort of big challenges that I chose for Toll. I wanted to do 2 things, and I hope I did them. I really think that I did, and reader feedback says that I maybe managed it. But the 2 challenges I set for myself were, firstly, that because there's an ethical dilemma at the centre of every Kestrel tale, that implies that there are, you know, valid arguments on both sides. And the baddies, or at least the primary active antagonist and changer, was a very clear baddie. And what I wanted to do was write a book where the person that Kestrel went up against, the antagonist, was someone that you agreed with and respected, at least to a certain extent. You might disagree with the degree to which they went, but that you would sort of like them, at least respect, and actually find yourself quite able to agree with the bad guy, which is not too common, I think. And Miwa was written from the start to allow that, but also he was written to be a bit preoccupied with the fact of his dilemma, to be a little bit operatic. And the reason that was done deliberately was to still allow the narrative arc to play out, where of course Kestrel win the day and the reader doesn't feel too betrayed. I mean, Miwa ultimately has to be removed as an antagonist, and we can mourn the loss of a man of principle, but we don't completely regret that he was thwarted. So Miwa was a fascinating character to construct, because I had to start from the basis of agreeing with the guy, even though he was up against my team and he was nominally the baddie. And then I had to back him off such that there was a detachment about him. In Miwa's case, his sort of morose introspective obsession with the, I guess, the intrinsic sadness of his role as a saviour of humanity, who would nevertheless be forever after primarily seen as a demon, you know. So that was a big and fascinating challenge that I set for myself, just to make the second book a bit harder, you know. And the other challenge I set was that in Kestrel books I've got 2 reveals, at least heretofore so far, and they happen at certain places, you know, maybe like 1/3 and 2/3 or something like that, approximately, maybe 25% and 75% approximately, and the one builds on the other. And what I wanted was for the final plot reveal, which I obviously had to figure out at the very start, in which the entire thing hinged upon. I wanted it to be like the best murder mysteries, you know. I wanted it to be a surprise to the reader, but a retrospectively sort of deducible surprise. And that is not an easy thing to do. I'm not saying that to praise myself. I'm saying that it requires constant guarding and constant holding back the ace, and very careful phrasing to just poke enough little hints that won't, you know, sort of tip the dominoes and run the whole thing at the time, but retrospectively will come back to you. I'm really mixing my gaming metaphors there, but hopefully you understand what I mean. And I think I managed to do that. There are some fascinating things about Toll. It's definitely the tightest book that I've written, and if your thing is the sort of techno-thriller proper, in that it's a sort of high-techy but also James Bondy, exotic-y, globe-hopping, run and gun, stakes and tension thing, that is exactly what Toll is. It is as classic to the genre as Kestrel books so far get Changer and Jinx diverge a wee bit in different directions. But Toll is tight. And again, maybe that must sound arrogant. I really don't mean it that way. I'm just trying to characterize it, looking back on it years later. And it really helps to establish that ethical dilemma hallmark of the Kestrel stories. It also does some fascinating stuff in terms of the overarching sort of chronology of Kestrel itself. Particularly, there's another bonus scene, of course, that people who subscribe to the newsletter on my site, they get that, and I will put it up on the Kestrel page as well at the proper place in the chronology. It sort of starts to give the first hints that things are not entirely okay and not entirely as they seem within the little world of Kestrel, the team, which is interesting and sets up a lot of stuff in Jinx, by the way. In terms of what I like most about this book, aside from hitting those two self-imposed challenges and being, pretty tight, I would say that my favourite scenes probably, it's not too much of a spoiler to say that there's an oil rig involved. My favourite scenes, I think, take place on the oil rig, because it's a run up to the first big reveal, which deals with the bell itself, and it's exposition, and it's got that sort of senior industry figure. Michael Anfrons was it in Changer, and there's a sort of oil company chairman person who's very likable, and it's tied in with so much with the Second World War and with technology and his own personal background and environmentalism as well. And I think there's Ramos also has a key role there with this dark pragmatism I talked about. But I think there's not even a poignancy, but there's almost a spine tinglingness about it. It's a particular exchange of dialogue when they're just about to go into this room where there is nothing right now, but things happened before. And for me, it's almost like a microcosm of the whole Kestrel story structure each time. It's really interesting to me. Research was important, of course. Oil rig. I was lucky because my wee sister, my sister-in-law, in fact, but I met her when she was 16, and she has always been and will always be my wee sister. She's a grown woman with children now, of course. She and her husband are both in the oil and gas industry, sort of process engineers and things. So she's often enough offshore, helicopters out in the North Sea and on oil rigs for days or weeks at a time. And she was able to sort of do this direct research and gather some photos and tell me about how things all worked. And I also needed, as a writer, as I say, you need the visuals. You need to have a sense of space. And I went up to Aberdeen, where they live, and there's an oil and gas museum there for the industry, and it's kind of like it's a half museum, half educational facility, and it's multi-story, and the entire centre of it is like open across all the floors of it, and there's a massive like scale model oil rig. So you come in at the entrance level on the ground floor, and that's maybe the seabed, but it goes right the way up, and you can go up and see it all, and you can watch the helicopter safety briefings and get all these interesting tidbits, like if you're on the helicopter and it crashes into the sea, you obviously get your survival suit on at all times when you're in the helicopter, but you crash into the sea, you keep your seatbelt on as it goes underwater. You don't take your seatbelt off because the fact that your seatbelt is pinning you to the seat gives you the leverage needed to use your feet to kick out the windows. And once you've done that, that's when you take off your harness and swim out. Obviously, if you didn't have a seatbelt on, you'd kick against the windows and probably just push yourself, you know, elsewhere in the cabin. That's a sobering thought, you know. And my wee sister, she's done the training a number of times where they've got, you know, they've got either a fake life-size helicopter body, or I guess just a repurposed old helicopter body with all the seats and the seat belts, and they put them in it, and it's got a massive crane. It's dumped into a big swimming pool sort of thing, upside down, and they have to get out. And that's the training they all go through, amongst many other things. And anything that stops in your tracks and has your mind's eye going to work is fabulous for fiction. You know, you can get a lot of that stuff straight in, and there's all these wee authentic touches, like what we call a fruit machine here, and I'm not sure what you call it elsewhere, but you know, the gambling machine where you like pull a lever or press 3 buttons and then it's like all the fruit comes down and these spinners, and you have to match. If you get 3, you win or whatever. I can't remember what that's called in North America, but we call it a fruit machine. And in the story, there's brief mention of one being there, and that's because there, you know, I've got a photo of one of those in an actual oil rig out in the North Sea, and lots of wee interesting things like that, and the signage and the sort of industrial feel of the place, and what it's like to be standing up there on the helipad, metal mesh beneath your boots, looking all the way impossibly far down to the sea and the waves crashing in. You can taste it almost. You can feel the anxiety that you would experience in that alien kind of environment, and I was able to channel all that into the book, despite having never set foot on a platform myself so far. Never say never. I hope it's never, but may happen. But that was fascinating as well. So yeah, other things that Toll helps to sort of establish for the Kestrel series. I spoke previously about how Changer has got this kind of Easter egg whereby there's a duplicate paragraph that starts both chapter 1 and the epilogue, because in the original draft that never made it anywhere near publication, there was a timeline reset at that point. And thank goodness that didn't happen. But it had the effect, when you come off of the last chapter and into the epilogue of Changer, it created this sense of uncertainty as to whether they'd been successful or not and what had happened. And I wanted to retain that in Toll, but I evolved it a bit. And what I wanted to do specifically was have that sort of that ambiguity, and also tie in the sort of visual sense of the colour of a Kestrel book is always relevant in the story, right? So I wanted to do both of those to create, I always think of it as a tricked transition, whereby there's the peril and there's the climax, and you come off the end of the last chapter with a moment of uncertainty, and the first paragraph or so of the epilogue does not immediately resolve that uncertainty, because there's a continuation of some aspect of colour and scene, and so the tension lasts just those few moments longer before you realise that there has actually been a transition. And I think of that as the trick transition, and Toll does that in a way that I spent quite a while sort of crafting and putting together. The other thing I really like about the epilogue of Toll is that it gives us our first really proper, I guess, moment with Greenwood and Aldridge. It's quite restrained. It's a sort of romantic moment, but it's done in a sort of as dignified, I guess, a way as I could do it, because there still exists the power structure and the chain of command and uncertainty and so on. And I put it there because you could chalk it up as the tension of the day and pressure of events and exhaustion, all that sort of stuff. But it moves that relationship forward. And yeah, I just really like it. And in fact, I knew that I was going to have that scene. I didn't know the location of it, but I knew I was going to have that scene, exactly how it would go between the two of them, long before. So much so that, believe it or not, that moment between the two of them in the epilogue of Toll was the first bit of Toll that I wrote, and I wrote it before I finished Changer. And I remember where I was. I was sitting on an exercise bike. I had a sort of wee laptop table thing that you could clamp onto the handles of the exercise bike, and I would be on the exercise bike every morning and do a bit of writing. And I remember thinking that it's crazy to do this. This is like a form of procrastination, which it blooming well was. But I just had that scene so clear in my mind, and I wrote it, and it just sat there and sat there and sat there. So the whole time I was writing Toll, I was writing towards this inconsequential to the plot but important to the characters little moment between the two of them. That was the thing I was always heading for, the sort of carrot instead of the stick to get me through it. The thing I get asked most often about Toll is, I guess it's a sign that I hopefully managed to successfully meet that first challenge I set for myself. People ask me, do you think Miwa was right? And I don't know. I don't know. People assume that when you pose a question in fiction that you have an answer in mind, and it's just not always the case. I think actually more often posing a question in fiction is a way of acknowledging the question to yourself and trying to answer it, rather than having a pre-formulated or presupposed answer. Do I think Miwa was right? I've been asked this loads of times, and I'm sure I've given various different answers. I think that his heart, in a respect, was in the right place. I can certainly see why he did what he did, or rather why he wanted to do what he wanted to do. But I think that he probably had the same feeling that I do, that many of us do, that an intention can be noble, but frustration in the difficulty of implementing that intention, or the amount of time it would take, can sort of push you past the optimism that was the foundation of that principle in the first place. And now that I think about it, there's this line that Aldridge comes back to a couple of times at the very end, including in the epilogue, actually, when he's speaking to Greenwood just before they have their moment, and he says, I'm pretty sure of this, it says that he's on the side of hope. And I think that's really key for Kestrel, because they always face these ethical dilemmas, and ultimately I think what Greenwood tries to do is to make the decision, all other things being equal, that allows for optimism, and that really ties deeply into the central dilemma of Toll. So spoilers, what is Toll about? I knew, of course, I wanted to write something about the bell, and the bell, of course, as a mysterious machine, it's a MacGuffin, it's a means to deal with an issue. The thing itself doesn't really matter, and you can sketch it in. The important thing is the situations it creates and how the characters handle that. So Miwa is an environmentalist, and very wealthy, global business, etc., and he's as you would be, and inevitably as an environmentalist, is frustrated to the point of perhaps borderline madness by our self-sabotaging nature. And in the course of his business, he, via some very interesting circumstances, comes upon this machine. And the machine, it's like, from his point of view, it's a depopulation weapon. You know, that's the big spoiler. And it's unclear through the book how he might achieve that aim using this machine that was constructed in the closing years of the Second World War and sort of spirited away. And the big sort of dilemma is that he's right that sort of something must be done, even though something must be done-ism is extremely dangerous. But when I was trying to put the plot together, I had no idea that it was about the environment and human impact on the world. And I'd put together little bits and pieces of the plot, so it was like a net, you know, there's lots of holes everywhere. And I remember I was walking into town to meet my wife. I was working from home. She was just finishing in the office right up smack bang in the middle of Edinburgh on Princes Street. And I'd walk up the hill each day with the dog, you know, as it gives him a good walk and gets to see mummy sooner, and I see my wife and walk her home and talk about our day. And Toll was rattling around in my head, and I realised whilst I was walking that the sort of the central crisis had to be about the fact that he was an environmentalist, but one who, I guess like Ramos, was someone who believed in doing the thing and balancing the ethics later, but was very aware of the ethics. And it all sort of started to naturally follow on from that. And it was surprising how quickly the plot came together. The challenges, aside from the two self-imposed ones I talked about before with Toll, were really not in figuring out all of the details of the plot, because once I realised this is about the environment, it fell into place really quickly. The challenges were purely technical ones. All of this, who's going to be where, and the pace, and how you, of course, delay the reveals, and how they fit into the larger thing, and how you do justice to the ethical dilemma with maximum stakes. And I think it does that. I really do. When you're a writer, we all know a lot about the sort of writer's life and the odd experiences of it, but you maybe don't, there's some you don't think about until they happen to you. And one of the things about being a writer is that people that you know in real life read your books as well. So your family read your books, and your friends, and you know how common it is for humans to ask each other, oh, what do you do? So people find out, you know. You can't keep it secret. Not that you should keep it secret, but you should write proudly. But people are fascinated that you're a writer. The response when you say, "Oh, I write books," is typically, "I've never actually met a writer in person before." And what I've learned is a good response is, I used to just say, "Well, now you have, hee hee hee." But what I like to say now is, "Not that you know of," because lots and lots of people write, and there's maybe a reluctance to admit it. But yeah, one of the things about being a writer is that people you know in real life read your stuff, and they know that you're a writer and so on. I've been walking down the street, and a car will pull in, and that's something that gets your attention, quickly become aware someone is stopped. maybe particularly if you're a suspicious writer in the first place, and it'll be one of my neighbours, and like with a friend or something, they'll be winding down the window and say, "Oh, this is the writer," stuff like that, and you're like, what do you say? Which is cool and everything, but yeah, people in real life read your books, and that includes your family. That's why I was on this thread in the first place. And my dad is an avid reader, always has been, and he reads my stuff. I do a weekly short story thing, reads all of that as well. And sometimes there'll be remarks and comments on particular parts of particular things. But with Toll, he came over to visit us not too long after it had been out, and I think my wife had to go out somewhere or whatever, so he and I are sitting chatting away as you do, and he said that he'd read it, and then he just sat and talked for about 10 minutes or 15 minutes or something about all the aspects of it. Not in a critical way, but in that way when you can clearly see someone's like read the whole damn thing and it's struck them and they've thought about it, and talking about the structure and the technique and how it impacted them and so on. And Toll is the one thing that I've written so far that really seemed to have that effect on people, and particularly when it's your father. It's whether or not there is this profound sense of validation and having done something well that of course echoes back to childhood need for approval and all that stuff, but it's always stayed with me, and it was an emotional thing, of course, inevitably. So there you go. We are going to be doing alternate covers. Of course, we did it with Changer. There's 3 different covers for Changer, pretty much, including the original one. There were 2 for Toll. This is, I'll show you Changer as well, just so you can have an impression of them together. So quite a unified identity there. I will put Toll up here so I don't need to hold it up, and so you can see it better. The colours, of course, is significant in the story. Even the time of day, that sort of sunset, the oil rig, of course, plays into it quite a lot. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise that the lady with the gun there is, of course, Captain Greenwood, and if you look carefully, you can see she's actually in a dress, and that's relevant as well. The actual lady is a model. A great many photos of her with guns in various poses, but this one, very striking, worked really well. And I like the unity of the 2 aspects of the image, the background and the foreground. I remember that I think someone remarked upon the entirely coincidental position of the sun going approaching the horizon there, or just about touching the horizon, with respect to Greenwood, and I think the implication was, obvious one: is she pregnant? It's like, no, it's nothing to do with that. So that's a sort of spoiler by absence. There's nothing like that. It hadn't even occurred to me. If anything, it would just be like, I don't know, you could wear a nice fancy belt over that dress with a big buckle, and that's where it would be. But no, that was just an amusing coincidence. The other cover, let me bring it up on my iPad so that I can talk about it. If I can, there we go. So this was the other one. Bidding obviously preserves the colour that was important. The colour was always mandated in my brief for the cover design. Again, Stuart Batch That book's covered. It's B-A-C-H-E. This, I don't know if you can tell, but it sort of contains another spoiler, because that background is, of course, the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. Fabulous place. Outside, it looks like, my God, it looks like aquatic aliens landed and started building a temple for themselves or something. It's like a, I don't know, hallucinatory, gigantic sandcastle that's been getting built for centuries. Gaudí was an incredible architect, and if you go to Barcelona, definitely go see it. Also go and see the Gaudí house and Park Güell. They're fabulous, particularly if you like sort of tile work and tessellation and stuff. Incredible. The Gaudí house is marvellous. Can be very warm in there with it being Barcelona. Maybe go early in the morning if you can. But the Sagrada Familia itself, it's astonishing. And the really interesting thing is that the interior is completely different to the feel of the exterior. The interior has a ultra modern sort of feel, like a space church almost. It's very monochromatic, and it's very sort of geometric and sort of architectural, if you know what I mean. And there's spectacle on outside, but there's a real sense of scale and almost a humbling effect of the interior of it. And what struck me when I was there, wife and I were, having a look about, and the feeling that struck me was that this is kind of like, imagine if you could get access to this place out of hours, same way you feel when you go to a museum, imagine you could like get in at night and have this to yourself. And I thought, well, I mean, rich people could probably do that. They could like book the place out for an evening event or something. Maybe you even can do that. Maybe not with a church. I don't know. Spain is quite a religious country, but that was one of the things that was in my head. And then I knew, of course, I had to set some scenes there, and there is indeed a really fun set of scenes, because it's not just the stuff that's in the basilica itself, but also there's a car chase, like a high speed through the city supercars chase after it, which I've always wanted to do. And Aldridge gets to drive, and Aldridge is me, so that's really cool. Some nice wee kind of sarcastic romantic bits about that as well. And Aldridge gets to do some of his quips. There's one that I really like. It's not that funny or anything, but it just seems so blooming Aldridge. There's the chase, the car chase, and the bad guys get away, and of course the local cops in Barcelona pull them over, and it's Aldridge behind the wheel, and Greenwood's there as well. And he winds down the window and he says something like, I keep forgetting that the speed limits are in kilometres here. And that, I can just like feel Greenwood rolling her eyes, but in that way that she's outwardly annoyed, but also trying not to be amused. So I'm extremely fond of the Sagrada Familia scenes in total for so many reasons. And this alternate cover clearly deals with that. You can see her dress a lot better. This is the same photo shoot, so it's the same dress that she's wearing on the cover that actually came to be. And she is wearing that dress in the, in the actual scenes, of course. I can't remember if the dress in the book is the same colour as the model was wearing. I probably had to change that digital, you can't really tell what colour it is, but it certainly looks reddish. I can't remember if it's red in the book, but I've got this vague memory that maybe her actual dress wasn't that colour, but I don't know. But very striking, very Greenwood. I remember liking the fun of the cover, but I think it's there's not enough contrast. It's quite a busy background, and I love the light. I love the way the light plays on her skin, you know, like around the shoulder, and you just get that sense of illumination, which is the hallmark of the experience being inside the Sagrada Familia. Got all the stained glass there and so on. It's almost a shame to have it monochromatic because it's spectacular. If you're there, really do go, do go. But I also remember thinking that I love the dynamics of her pose, but I almost didn't like the degree to which the sort of tension of the situation is showing on her face, because Greenwood's a bit more of a sort of controlled and stoic person. Absolutely get why the model has that expression, and it makes a lot of sense, and it'd be great in a lot of contexts, but I prefer the sort of more determined, sort of firm chin, let's get this done. Even though I've got a gun and presumably I'm being shot at or I'm about to shoot at people, I'm still absolutely controlled, and that's Greenwood. So there you go, that was the ultimate cover. There were only the two, and we obviously went with that other one and worked it up a bit. I seem to recall that in the toe cover as it is, or the concept that became the toe cover as it is, rather made a bunch of changes to I think the sizes of the name of the book, not my name. I think that's about the same between the two of them, but you might maybe see the toll is bigger than Changer. It's a larger font size, you know, and that was sort of an accommodation for the fact that so much of book selling now is online, of course, and you've got these websites and they're showing grids of books in search results and genre lists, and it's a tiny wee postage stamp sized thing, so it's advantageous to have the title at least be a wee bit bigger as a, you know, relative to the size of the overall cover. So that was a sort of pragmatic thing. Spines follow the same pattern. They should look approximately the same, although the what do you call it, the tracking on toll, the space between the letters is greater in order for it to take up more space down the spine. It looks more balanced that way, even though it's a difference between the two. And of course you've got that lovely KESTREL logo that I am so fond of, and the all-important author's name. So there you go. That's Toll. It's I said before with Changer that, or in the previous video about Changer rather, that I've got different primary emotions for each book. Toll it's the second novel, so it's thank God I was able to do it again at all. But my main feeling for it is I really do try not to sound arrogant. I hate the language of arrogance, but please allow me to just sort of be frank and be assured that it's within the context of humility. I do feel pride at the technical achievement of Toll, I would say. And I think the tale itself, as in the story, not its structure, just the actual story and its contents, is it really stands up. It's a good entry in the series, and I wouldn't have thought that I could put together something like that, and I couldn't have when I started learning how to write books with Changer. There are days when I doubt I could do it again, but you have to try not to think that way. Toll is a really strong entry. I think Changer, what would I say? Chains have got a lot of heart. Toll has got a lot of execution and polish, and it's like a bunch of achievements. And I think if you read the two of them close together in time, you'll feel the bump there. You'll see where improvements have been made, where I maybe got a wee bit better at things. Jinx, the third one, I would characterize it as, I would say it has a different scale. It's a more focused scale. It goes large, if I may use that expression, on the ethical dilemma side of things, and it's more contemporary. And I would say that it has a higher confidence level because it's less constructed. But Toll, I would have to say, is the one that I feel is the most technically well executed. Maybe you feel differently if you read these books, but I had such a feeling of achievement when I finished it, and it's been extremely well received as well. And I have to say, as much as it goes against my nature to use words like this, and I'm uncomfortable using words like this, but I have to say that I am proud of it, if you'll allow me to say so. So there you go, that's Toll. It also served a hugely important function with that epilogue moment of leading us a wee bit forward in Greenwood and Aldridge's relationship, and sets the groundwork for, of course, the third one, Jinx, which is, again, a very different sort of story. Interesting one, this, to write and to think about, and that's what we'll be talking about in the next video. Thank you so much again for listening to me waffle away for all this time. My goodness, don't you have something better to do? You must. I've been talking so long, I'm starving. You probably heard my stomach rumbling. I apologise. I hope that Final Cut Pro post-processing will remove some of that. But yes, I have waffled away. I'm going to go and feed the dog and feed myself. And I'll get this edited and get it online. I really, truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to me talk about these books. I love them so much. Not just the books, but the characters. And it's a massive privilege when someone invites you and your stories and your made-up people into their own mind for a few hours and goes on that journey with you. It's fantastic. As it says at the end of the sort of wee author's acknowledgement in the back of these books, KESTREL will return, and so will this video series. Please leave any comments, ask any questions you might like to ask wherever this is posted, and of course you can contact me directly, including signing up for those newsletters if you wish, or the weekly free mini story at my site. I would absolutely love to hear from you, and I hope that you'll be back to watch the next video in this series. Thanks so much and take care.